In this video, we're going to go through the tort problem and seek out the torts and figure out what the applicable principles are. Now, at this particular point in the course, you should have already looked at the tort video and taken notes. You should have handy your tort definition sheet, which was posted to eLearn. Now, the tort problem starts off by saying J.R. Ewing, blah, 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 blah. Well, I have to give you some background information about the family. Jock Ewing, patriarch of the family, deceased, leaves two legitimate sons, J.R. Ewing, who's a bit of a shyster, okay? Doesn't actually get caught doing illegal things, but, if he isn't overstepping the line, he's coming awfully close to it. Then there's the other son, Bobby Ewing, who is dashingly handsome and terribly honest. Bobby Ewing has a wife, Pamela Ewing, who is an absolute bombshell, a very beautiful woman. This is from a TV program, by the way. I couldn't possibly think this one up myself. Anyway, Pamela Ewing has a brother, Cliff Barnes. Cliff Barnes hates J.R. Ewing, hates the Ewings, and is always trying to beat them at business deals. Now, the family has two main businesses. There is a cattle ranch called South Fork, huge ranch, okay? The other business is Ewing Oil. Now, Bobby and J.R. run Ewing Oil. There's an illegitimate son, Ray Krebs, who isn't smart enough to do the oil work, so he runs the ranch, okay? And then the other actor in there is Jeremy Wendell, who runs Westar Oil, and it's in competition with Ewing Oil, and they're always trying to beat each other. Okay, so that's the basic setup. You should go online and go into the Google South Fork and listen to the opening credits for the show. It's really quite amazing. All right, so we're going to do two things today. One is we're going to go through the problem and we're going to seek out the torts and figure out what the principles are so that you can practice. The other thing we're going to do, or at least I'm going to do, is make a suggestion to you as to the best way of tackling Part C problem on my exam. Now you got Part A, 15 terms, 18 definitions, and you have to match the terms to the definitions. You should be able to do most of those like that from using your index cards before the exam. If you go into the exam and you have to look up the answers, you will not get to Part C with adequate time to do a good job. Okay, so Part C, or Part A you've done. Part B, question 1, you don't know what's coming, but I'll give you some hints. And then you have a choice of 4 out of 8 questions on Part B. Once you've done that, then you get into Part C. It's a long problem. Now, Part A and Part B, mostly regurgitation. Part C is where I try to figure out those that can actually not only regurgitate the legal material, but can apply it. And I have a particular way that I think you should answer the questions. I have put on eLearn a file called Answering the Tort Problem. Okay, so let's get into it. In the first paragraph, J.R. Ewing made some unauthorized changes to an oil reserve report for a Texan oil field and left the altered report on a table by poolside at South Fork where he knew Cliff Barnes would notice it. Cliff was visiting his sister Pamela, and true to form, he noticed the report and surreptitiously absconded with it. Okay, surreptitiously. If you don't know what that means, it means that the report's sort of sitting on a table, and he goes, "Oh, look over there," and he grabs it. Okay, so he's taking it wrongfully. He analyzed the report, and although he had the required expertise and should have noticed the alterations, his desire to beat the Ewings caused him to miss the errors. Cliff subsequently advised Jeremy Wendell of Westar Limited that in his expert opinion, the oil was an excellent investment. Wendell, in his attempt to destroy Ewing Oil, bought the rights to the field for $27.3 million. The wells were actually all but dry, and upon discovering the true situation, Wendell called in his loans to Barnes and advised that if Barnes failed to pay back the $6 million loans within 3 days, Wendell would realize his security and take over the Wentworth Industries. Okay, so there you are, and you think, okay, now this is worth 40 marks. I've got to put a lot of ink on the paper. So you begin writing, and on page 1 of the slide or the file called Answering the Tort Problem, I put the question that's asked. List the legal issues and discuss the applicable legal principles. So you start writing, and you write, in this tort problem, J.R. Ewing made some unauthorized changes to the oil reserve report for the Texan oil field. This is fraudulent misrepresentation. He left the altered report on a table by poolside at South Fork where he knew Cliff Barnes would notice it. Barnes did notice it and surreptitiously stole the report. This is the tort of conversion. Barnes, in his desire to beat the Ewings, did not notice the alterations, although he had the required expertise. He told Jerry Wendell that the oil fields was an excellent investment, and Wendell bought it. But the wells are all but dry. Barnes made a negligent misrepresentation. In the next paragraph, Jerry Wendell threatens to call Barnes loans. This is economic duress. And you filled a whole big chunk of paper, and you think, wow, I am so nailing this. Well, okay, go to the next page, and I'll show you the marks you got. All right, in that whole section that you wrote out, you got 1 mark for saying the issue is fraudulent misrepresentation, the changing the oil reserve report. Cliff takes it, that's conversion. You got another mark. Way down, he had the expertise, but failed to notice the changes. Tells Wendell to buy it. That's a negligent misrepresentation. You got 3 marks. You're just, hot here. You're just hammering away. In the next paragraph, Wendell threatens to call Barnes loans. This is economic duress. Yes, I am nailing this. No, you're not. Okay. Now you've got 4 marks. But the problem is, you failed to give the principles. And when you're regurgitating so much of the problem, you're wasting time. My recommendation is, as shown on page 3, on the left-hand side of the page, you put the issues. Then you put a line down the middle of the page. And on the right-hand side, wait, there's nothing there. That's because that's where you put the legal principles, okay? By doing it that way, you're listing the issues and you think, oh, wait, something's missing. Something on the left-hand side. Oh, yeah, I'd better put in the principles. Then, on page 4, it shows you the marks you'll actually get. Fraud, misrep. You don't even have to write out fraudulent misrepresentation, okay? You just say fraud, misrep. I'll know what you mean, but you have to tell me where you saw it. So you go, changes to report, and then I know that you not only recognized it, but you actually saw it in the problem. One year, a student looked at the problem and he went, oh, I don't know how to answer that. Okay, well, I'll just list the torts. And so in perfect order from my lecture guide, he listed the 20 some odd torts. And he thought, there, I'll get some marks because I'm bound to hit some of them. Okay, and I gave him very little marks. He obviously knew the material, but what's the point of knowing the material if you don't know how to apply it in life? So what you want to do is put fraud, misrep, and then tell me where you saw it. Changes to the report. Bingo, 1 mark. Then on the right-hand side, which was blank, you put false statement made recklessly, carelessly, whether it be true or false, and bingo, now you got 2 marks. Conversion, taking the report. You told me where you saw it. Converting the goods to goods of another to one's own use. Now you got 4 marks. 4 marks. Then you put negligent misrep. Don't write out negligent misrep, just put negligent misrep, missing the alterations. I'll know what you mean. Then you put negligent statement causing a purely economic loss. Now, I didn't write it all out because I'm just, I don't have room on my screen. And then the next one is economic duress, Wendell's threats to Barnes, coercion with no realistic alternative. Bingo. Now you got 8 marks instead of 4. Okay, so it's a very good way of answering the problem. You write less and you don't miss things, and so you're going to wind up getting more marks. All right, so now we're just going to continue with the report on slide number 5, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to list the issues. I'm not going to put down all the principles. I'll just, mention them as I'm going through this, but you can look them up yourself if you don't understand them. Okay, let's see. We got down to paragraph number 3. After steadying his nerves with a few bourbons, Barnes noticed Bobby Ewing enter the club. Barnes yells, "It's all your fault, Ewing. I'm ruined. You and your brothers are both crooks. You lie and cheat in your business dealings, stealing from us fortunate but honest business men. I'll get you for this." All right. So in this particular problem, there's two things that I want to mention. It's not only the tort, but I'll get you for this. I want to deal with that. All right, so obviously there is a defamation here. He calls them crooks. As I mentioned, J.R. Ewing may be a crook, but Bobby Ewing isn't, so that's defamation. What kind is it? Slander. All right, you put down defamation, you put down slander, you get 2 marks. You put down defamation and give me the principal, then you only got 1 mark so far. If you put down defamation or slander and give me the principal, you've only got 1 mark. But if you put defamation and slander, then you get 2 marks plus 1 mark for the principal. Now I'll get you for this. Let's go back to the definition of assault. Could that be an assault? No, because I'll get you for this could mean a number of things. I'm going to beat you up right now, or I'm going to beat you in the next business deal. Or it could mean a week from next Thursday, I'm going to come by your place and get you, all right, and punch you. Well, the definition of assault is apprehension of imminent harmful and distasteful contact. So by saying I'll get you for this, it isn't imminent enough and it's not clear that it's actual a threat of contact. However, it was defamation, and then he does commit an assault. In the next paragraph, Barnes takes a drunken swing at Bobby, who appeared to be more perturbed than worried. Okay, so he's not worried at all. So it cannot be an assault, right? No, remember, assault is apprehension of. Now, apprehension means a fear of, but he wasn't fearful. But it also means an expectation of. Well, he expected to get hit. How do we know? Because he defended himself. In response, Bobby rearranged Cliff's nose, kicked him where the sun doesn't shine, and introduced Cliff's face to the wall. All right, obviously a battery, the merest unconsented to intentional touching of another. But he has a potential defense. Now, we don't know whether it is or it isn't. Oh, no, he used too much force, so it can't be. Doesn't matter. It is an issue. It will be discussed at trial. Put it down. Okay? So, battery, Barnes swing, beating up Barnes, 1 mark. Then the principal is merest unconsented to intentional touching of another. Now you got both marks. Self-defense, 1 mark. Use of no more force than is reasonably necessary. Now, we don't know what's reasonable. Okay, I'm not saying be the judge. I'm just saying what's the issue. Okay, so you put that down. Okay. Once Barnes had recovered, he drove to South Fork bent with revenge. That's a grammatical error. The way you'd write that is bent with or bent on revenge, not with revenge. He bent on revenge. But I get by that by saying, well, he was beaten up so badly he was bent with revenge. Okay, locked the pool maintenance man in the pump house and poured a bucket of live piranha in the Ewing swimming pool. Okay, he goes onto the property in the first paragraph to visit his sister, Pamela. What category did he enter the property? He wasn't an invitee because he wasn't there for business, but he was coming to visit his sister, so he's not trespassing. That means he must be an invitee. He has an implied license to come and visit his sister. But when he comes back this time, it is for a nefarious purpose. Oh, I love that word, nefarious. He's there to do harm, and therefore he is a trespasser. Now, if you put trespasser here, there's another trespass later on. Put the trespasser here in the definition. Later on, you get 1 mark for saying it's a trespass, but you do not get another mark for repeating the definition. I'll get onto that more later. Okay, he locks the pool guy in the pump house. So just say pool guy, and I'll know what you're talking about. That's a false imprisonment. Intentional unlawful confinement. That will actually be worth 1 mark for false imprisonment and 2 for the definition, because without a confinement, there's no false imprisonment or imprisonment of any kind. So the two operational words, an intentional and unlawful, both of which occur here, so it's false imprisonment. All right, he pours the piranha in the pool. One year I said, okay, that's a private nuisance, and somebody said, and I said, because you come out the next morning and you're going to have a swim and you put your toe in the pool and the piranha eat your toe. Some smart student says, Professor Holden, no, it's chlorine in the pool would kill the fish. Okay, you come out the next morning and you take off your robe and you're going to have a swim and you put in your toe and you pick a dead fish. That's still a private nuisance. So private nuisance, interference with the use and enjoyment of private property. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Ray Krebs, noticing what was happening, set out in pursuit of Barnes. Barnes attempted to make good his escape in his leased Mercedes. Krebs chased after him in his Jeep. A little lifestyle comment there. Barnes is always putting on airs as a business person, trying to make himself sound more important than he really is. Well, obviously, he would drive a leased Mercedes. And Krebs, of course, is the guy that takes care of the ranch, and so he would have a Jeep. As the vehicle entered the highway, the Mercedes crossed the center line, forcing an oncoming truck off the road. Okay, what's the issue here? Oh, reckless endangerment, negligence in the operation of a motor vehicle. No, those are crimes. Okay, we're looking for torts here. This is a tort problem, not a criminal problem. So what is it? Well, if you're driving the car negligently, negligence. So you say negligence, then on the right-hand side you say defendant owes the duty of care, defendant breached duty of care, defendant caused damages, and you'll get 2 marks over there as well. Now, a truck, and he forces an oncoming truck off the road. The truck was driven by Harry Head, who, it was discovered, was driving under the influence of drugs. Hey, man, a car. Hey, man, a telephone pole. Okay, so the truck struck a telephone pole, which fell and broke the fence on old John McDonald's farm. A couple of issues here. Now, Barnes was negligent and caused the accident, but Head was under the influence of drugs, and so had he not been, he might have been able to avoid the accident, and therefore he is contributorily negligent. Okay, I'm not sure whether I covered that in the video or not, but I hope so. If I'm negligent and I injure you, and then you do something ridiculous and further your injury, I'm not negligent for all your injury. I'm only negligent for part of it because you contributed to your own injury. That was in the case of Solby's store, which is in the one of the articles that I put up on the screen. The woman drives into the parking lot and she gets out and it's winter and there's black ice and she tries to get across the parking lot to the ATM in front of the store. She slips and falls and injures herself. Well, the store was negligent because they didn't get rid of the black ice. Didn't have a policy for trying to do so. She, on the other hand, caused part of her injuries because she was in dress shoes and she knew there was black ice. Okay, that's contributory negligence. Okay, and then, let's see, where are we? It's also a public nuisance because you're on the phone. Hi, Mom. Yeah, I'm coming home on the weekend. Hopefully you might be able to help me with the laundry. And hello, Mom. Hello, Mom. Hello. Because the telephone line is down. So that's a public nuisance, interference with the use and enjoyment of public property. It's also a trespass. We talked about trespass being the two guys that were beating up on a third in ye old England, and they picked up the guy and they threw him onto the Lord's property, and the Lord sued the fellow for trespass. And in court, the judge said, no, the fellow that was thrown onto your property did not trespass. He didn't do that intentionally or voluntarily. He was thrown on there, so the other two people caused the trespass. So if I can throw somebody on your property and cause a trespass, and I knock a telephone pole down on your property, I've caused a trespass. All right, things go from bad to better, and baddest and better, and horrible and worse. It's just unbelievable what happens here. On the next page, the cattle from old John MacDonald's farm began to stampede due to the noise of a stuck horn on Head's truck. The cattle stampeded onto the adjacent property and began trampling the corn crop. Farmer Bob, the owner of the cornfield, tried to turn the cattle around by firing a rifle in the air. One of the bullets damaged an engine on a crop duster being flown overhead by Chunky Yeager. Yeager bailed out but the plane crashed into an oil well on South Fork, and the oil began to burn. Okay, here's the challenge. Who is Chunky Yeager, by the way, is Chuck Yeager's younger, heavier brother. Who is Chuck Yeager, and what is he famous for? The first person that emails me the answer to that question will get 1 bonus mark. 1% of your grade for just doing that. All right. Now, what have we got? Well, the cattle stampede is, let's see, that would be strict liability, because you collect cattle on your property, and they're dangerous. And it escapes through no fault of your own. So John MacDonald said, hey, I didn't break the fence. I didn't let them out. Doesn't matter, because he collected those dangerous things on his property. He's responsible for all the resulting damages. Now, that's the principle, okay? You could say strict liability and give me that whole principle. If you collect something on your property that's dangerous and it escapes even through no fault of your own, you're responsible for all the resulting damages. Or you can say strict liability, Rylance versus Fletcher. If you know the right name of the case, I have to assume that you know the principle behind it. But if you put down Rylance versus Smith, you don't get any marks. Okay. But I will never ask you what is the principle in Rylance versus Fletcher. But you can use the case to answer the problem. Okay. So strict liability. Farmer Bob fires the gun in the air. There's a crop duster. It hits it. Now, what is this? Well, it's negligent, okay, but there's a better tort, a more applicable tort. Let's put it that way. Farmer Bob is the occupier of the property. He either owns it or he's leasing it. Doesn't matter. He's the occupier. He has a liability to people that come onto his property. Occupier's liability. The crop duster, we don't know if he's an invitee, so he's dusting Farmer Bob's corn and just happens to be flying around, or if he's dusting a field next door and just happens to be flying his plane through Farmer Bob's airspace. In the first situation, he's an invitee. Farmer Bob has to remove dangers of which he is aware or ought to have been aware. Well, firing the gun in the air when you know there's a plane up there, okay. So he's definitely liable for occupier's liability. But what happens if the fellow's a trespasser? Well, firing your gun in the air, reckless, injured him through careless disregard. All right. Now, Chunky Yeager bails out and the plane crashes into the oil well. Was Chunky Yeager negligent for bailing out? No. If a plane is about to crash, that's the appropriate thing to do. After you bail out, if the plane crashes into something, it's probably going to be considered an unavoidable accident. There's a case in the United States just outside Baltimore. There's an Air Force base. One of the planes was flying around at one of those jets. Very small wings. If the engine fails, the jet flies like a brick. Okay? So, anyway, and there was a flame out. So and that means for a reason unknown, the engine stops. The pilot's trying to ignite the engine again, and the people in the control tower said, "Bail out, bail out, bail out." Why do they say it 3 times? Well, in an emergency situation like that, what happens if the two people are talking to each other and somebody says, what do you think? Should he bail out? And the guy goes, bail out. And they go, no, I didn't want you to. I was just talking to a friend. So in an emergency situation, particularly in the military, they give the command 3 times in a row. Bail out, bail out, bail out. And you don't do that until you hear the 3rd command. Okay, so anyway, they tell him to bail out, and he does. And off he goes, right in the plane, into the oil well. Unavoidable accident. If you put down negligence, I will not take off marks, okay. But if you identify it as an unavoidable accident, I'll probably give you 1 mark. Okay, so the oil well is now burning. J.R. Ewing called in the famous Red Adair, who arrived at South Fork to put out the fire. Red Adair is a very famous American. I don't know whether he's still alive or not, but because of the oil industry in the United States, he made a fortune by putting out oil fires. So you'd have the oil well there and the fire and all the smoke, okay? And he would back a crane up. Carefully back up, carefully back up. Suspended from the crane would be nitroglycerin wrapped in asbestos. And he would back it into the flame, and then he'd get out of the truck and he'd run like the dickens, go behind a rock. The explosion would suck up all the oxygen, no fire, now you've got oil. Okay, then he backs up another truck. Suspended from the crane is a well capper. They put it on and they bolt it down, and then they screw the wheel shut, and bingo, you've capped the well again. When Saddam Hussein took over Kuwait, and then the United Nations forces went in and kicked him out, as he was leaving, he used his Bic lighter and he lit all the oil wells on fire. Actually, he didn't. He used explosives, but all the oil wells were burning. And they called in Red Adair, who looked at it, and he said, oh my God, it's going to take 5 years to get all these out. It would have been an environmental disaster. There would have been so much smoke and pollution into the air that it could have potentially been an extinction event, caused a drop in the temperature and a new ice age. Okay. Anyway, they called in crews from all over the world, and they called in some Canadians, and we're called Crazy Canucks. Not only for our downhill ski team, who, these guys, they're crazy going that fast. But anyway, we were called Crazy Canucks for this too, because they went over there, and rather than backing a truck up, I mean, they would have needed thousands of trucks. Okay. Anyway, rather than doing that, they walked up to the flames wearing asbestos suits, holding a fire hose, and they shot the water across the top of the burning oil well, and the water pushed all the oxygen out of the way, and they were, putting out the fires very quickly, and everything was done. I think something like 5 or 6 months. Time magazine in the United States, Red Adair saves world. Big picture of him. In the Canadian issue of Time magazine, Canadians were there too. We should have got credit for much of what was done there. Anyway, back to the story. Red Adair arrives at South Fork to put out the fire. Upon his arrival, he ordered some explosives. Touchy Turkey Transport, Inc., notice that, sent a truckload to South Fork, but the truck broke down. Now, there has to be negligence there. We don't discuss it, but there's this thing called res ipsa locator. But for some action by somebody, this would not have occurred. So, but for the negligence of a Touchy Turkey Transport, Inc., the truck would not have broken down. As the driver walked for help, the cargo mysteriously exploded. Notice how the driver got out safely. That's because I don't want any gratuitous violence in my problem. Once again, stampeding the cattle through the corn and leaving the burned out truck across the road. Okay, so there's negligence here. That's the truck breaking down. Now, you said negligence up above when the Mercedes crossed the yellow line. So saying negligence again, you get a 1 mark for identifying the issue. If you give me the principle again, you do not get more marks for giving me the principle a second time. So just say see above. Okay. If you didn't put in the top then just put it down there and no problem. Okay. The cattle stampede, again, that's strict liability. Poor old John McDonald's having a really bad day. And the burned out hulk of the truck across the road is, of course, a public nuisance. Do you know in the province of Saskatchewan, for example, because they have these huge farms, if there was something blocking the road, you would be miles from another potential roadway, or you would be, just like stuck there. And so you could actually pull out around whatever is blocking the road and trespass over somebody else's property, and you will not be committing a crime nor a tort. One of their specific laws. We don't have that in the province of British Columbia. Just a little tidbit of knowledge there. I don't think you'll be tested on that on the exam, though. Okay, so we get into the last paragraph. We can back up. Negligence. Touchy Trinky Transport Inc. will be responsible vicariously for the torts of their employees committed during the course of employment. So there's the vicarious liability. There will be vicarious liability on the exam somewhere, somehow. Why? Because it is such an important concept in business law. Okay, the second load of explosives made it to South Fork, and Red Adair put out the fire. To cap the well, Adair used a new well capper, but it failed to function, and he was forced to use an old model capper. By that time, many gallons of oil had been lost as it spilled into the Rattlesnake River, one of the sources of water for nearby Dallas. Okay, so obviously the new well capper fails to function, and there's damage caused. That will be product liability, the negligent manufacture of goods. The water or the oil goes into the water supply. You have a tap, and you look at your glass of water that you're about to drink, and there's an oil slick on it. Obviously, that is a public nuisance. Okay, and the the oil in the water is an environmental damage, so you're strictly liable. As the lawyer for Ewing Oil, I would argue that I didn't collect the dangerous thing on the property. Okay, strict liability says if you collect something on your property and it escapes, but I didn't collect it on my property. It's been there since the days of the extinction of the dinosaurs, and so therefore I cannot be liable. As the Attorney General for the state of Texas, what I would argue is, well, okay, it was under the ground, everything was copacetic, but you brought it to the surface and it escaped. Therefore, you collected it on the surface, and therefore it is strict liability. All right. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that as you're going through, what happens if you do, trespass when Barnes came onto the property, and then you put private nuisance, fish in the pool, and then you put negligence, crossing the yellow line, contributory negligence, and then you go, oh, wait, there's also false imprisonment. And so then you go back and you go, and you're trying to, type it in or change it in, whatever. Don't, okay, just continue typing. Because down, after public nuisance, knocking the telephone down, you go, oh, wait, false imprisonment. Okay, I'm going to find it. And I've got a marking guide that looks a lot like screen on page 5. So you just continue going and don't worry about going back and, scrolling down and things like that. Just type it down as you think of it. All right, now discuss the issues and legal principles applicable. This is a tort problem, but Part C on the exam will cover torts, it'll cover contracts, and it will cover the things related to the Canadian legal system. So it can be all of those, all right? And I think that's it. If you have any questions about that, please feel free again to email me, and I will probably respond to your question, but do it in a blast email to everybody, because if you ask the question, odds are somebody else has thought about it and was too nervous about asking the question, or they hadn't thought about it but they should have. Okay, so that's the tort problem.